shamanic work, plant medicine work, is what we call shadow work. So you're able to examine and see all the different shadow areas of your life, the darkness in your life. And we say darkness, but it's really wounding, it's past life trauma, it's present life trauma, it's ancestral patterns that don't serve you. And it was only until I did shamanic work that I was able to really dive deep into that. I mean, I think that psychotherapy is another way, but I have psychotherapists that I've worked with, and they told me that one night of shamanic plant medicine ceremony work was equivalent to 10 years of work in psychotherapy. And this is coming from a psychotherapist.
Vonetta, thank you so much for joining me all the way from Bali. I know it's early and you were so sweet. You sent me your amazing book, A Shaman's Apprentice. I think it arrived 2 days ago and I'm 160 pages in. It's really, really good. And I can tell it's a labor of love. You weren't like those self-published books where people they bang out a quick book just so they can say they're a published author. You put your heart and soul and your life story in it. And it's just really powerful. It's beautiful. And I can't wait to finish it.
Wow. Thank you. It makes me so excited to see you excited. And when other people are excited about the book, it's so interesting because I've been wanting to write this book for such a long time. As you read in the first scene of that book, that experience that I had on plant medicine really changed the course of my life. And I was told I needed to write this particular memoir from that experience. But I have, as you're reading, I have so many stories, so many experiences of my life along this path of mysticism, because I dove into meditation at such a young age, and it just opened up a door, another realm to the divine and experiencing this reality in a different way. And so it was really tough to decide which stories get put in the book, but also for the longest time, I knew that they were so out there that for the longest time, I was going to make it a fiction book. I'm like, no one can believe that this is real. And then along the writing journey, my higher self was like, no, you need to tell the truth. People are ready to receive it. And I think people need to understand that there are more realms. There are other experiences beyond just this physical one that we can touch with our five senses.
Well, I'll tell you this. I've been with my wife now for 8 years. And before I met her, I grew up in a very atheist household. I was very much like science, nothing else, just science, what you can prove, what you can see, that's all you can believe. And I've changed my mind on so many things the last 8 years. And, I've done some things independently of my wife's influence. I also had 2 ayahuasca ceremonies. I've been a bit more open-minded to realizing there's a lot of things that I know now that I didn't know 10 years ago. So in 10 years, I'm going to look back at myself today with that same kind of mindset. But even just yesterday, my wife lost both her parents, and my son says that they come to him in his dreams. And she was telling me, and it was powerful. She believes that my son's he's got some powers there, and it's wild. It's wild to think. There's the way my brother had this great analogy when I was asking him these philosophical questions when I was young, my older brother, and he said, "There's so many things we don't understand. Humans are just evolved animals, and when you see ants walking on the street, they have a bit of understanding of what's in front of them and the ant colony, but there's a whole world that they don't understand." And I have I think that there's the same philosophy for us. There's so much humans that we're going to Mars. We changed the whole planet in so many ways. We've done so many amazing things, but there's also so many things that we don't understand. So I'm totally much more open-minded to that. And yeah, anyone that's so closed-minded it's kind of sad to me, because there's a whole world out there of wild things, and people like you that you have different gifts.
Yeah, it's interesting what you shared about your son. I think that the children that are coming into the planet today have more of these gifts to help to help usher our evolution as humans. I know that we are definitely just animals, evolved animals, but there's a uniqueness to us that we have this consciousness. And I feel that what we're doing collectively is trying to break through barriers of consciousness that have held us limited in our perception of who we are and the world around us, especially in relationship to the cosmos. We've forgotten that we're not just species on this planet, but that we're species on this planet that is a part of a larger universal system of, it goes beyond and beyond, beyond. So yeah, my gifts, I mean, they're still wild. I still question sometimes, like, is that really real? And so I'm in the deeper inquiry all the time around my gifts and the things that I've experienced and how to frame them in a way that helps people understand and really helps to bridge people from what I would say is practical mind into more of an open mind.
I had I had a friend from England, one of my childhood friends, and he sent me a video of 22-year-old kids in Ibiza, the party island of Spain. And in England, growing up, that's what we used to do. Like every year after high school and college, me and my friends would go there for a week or two, and we'd just go to these clubs. And I was watching the video, and I got some of. I haven't been to LA. I don't do that. It's been 20 years since I did that. But just watching this video for 30 seconds this morning, I got some of those same feelings of, I used to love, like when I was young, I'd go to these clubs and I didn't drink alcohol. I didn't take any drugs. I literally would just drink water and dance. I just loved the music, like the music, the experience. And there's something about thousands of people in these, the world's biggest nightclubs. And it's almost like we become, you're not individual anymore. It's like the hive mentality. Like you all kind of consumed by this app. And it's the same with anything, with a concert or, like you go to a big sporting event, like all the way the crowd all look, you get to a different level. And I think it was just so interesting that I was reminded that even just this morning that, yeah, we're such complicated creatures, I guess.
Yes, we are extremely complicated. One time I love that story about Ibiza. And I've had a different experience in Ibiza. I went to the north where it was more quiet. And even though I could dip into the party aspect, there's also this culture in Ibiza that honors the sun. And I remember I was just walking the beach at a sunset and people broke out with drums and dancing. And I was like, oh my God, I don't think I've ever seen a community of people honoring the sun in this way. It was so beautiful. But about the complicated, I'll tell you this funny story. So I lived in LA for a really long time, and everyone in LA who was part of the spiritual community went to see this ninth generation Vedic astrologer. His name was Chakrapani. And Gurmukh was one of my yoga teachers. She did my prenatal yoga when I was pregnant with my son. She was like, I don't make a move. I don't make a decision in my business until I've consulted Chakrapani. And I was hearing this from like lots of different people. So I'm like, I got to see this guy, this ninth generation Vedic astrologer. Oh my God. And I was so excited. I had this appointment. I go and sit down, and it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he might be like 75 or something. And it's so funny because he's sharing your ninth house and Mars, da, 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 and he's just almost as if he doesn't, it's like on autopilot. He's done this so many times. He knows it so well. He can do it with his eyes closed. But at one point he said, oh, Vonetta, you are complicated, complicated, complicated. Complicated mind, complicated heart, complicated. And I'm like, oh my God, that doesn't sound good. But it's true,
Yeah. Well,
I know I'm complicated.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I had two friends, and they were kind of bickering because one of them called a third friend, oh, he's weird, like this throwaway comment. And the one friend was like, oh, you shouldn't talk badly of our friends. And I was like, no, that's a compliment. If someone said you're average and normal, I'll be heartbroken. So I think that's a compliment that you're you're complicated and you're not normal. I think that's really awesome. But before we start, I have to tell you something. I was laughing. So you talk about this book that you were reading, The Autobiography of a Yogi. And I read this 20 years ago, and I've got to reread it because I was boxing in the Golden Gloves, and there was I had to weigh in, and I was going to box like in 4 or 5 hours. So I would just sit there and I'd read books, between, because there's nothing to do for hours, just trying to calm my mind. So I was reading this book, and this reporter came over to me and he was talking to me. I didn't even know what he was saying. I was like so in the zone. And then there was an article in Sports Illustrated about the Golden Gloves that week in Chicago. And there was a thing about me, and they said, oh, most of the people were behaving fiercely, but I was just sitting there reading the Autobiography of a Yogi, and he asked me, oh, how is it? And I was like, it's not that great. But I was thinking, what was I doing trying to read this book in that atmosphere? That was the complete wrong atmosphere. So after you mentioned it, I'm going to reread this now in a much calmer state 20 years later. So I just want to say, but there's so many things that were kindred spirits, that was one of them. It had me laughing. I was like, that's quite a funny memory that just came back.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that book is amazing, life-changing. And you read the story of how it came to me, which was so interesting, that he was showing up in my dreams. And I'm like, who's this Indian man, this strange Indian man in my dreams? And it turns out to be him. That same book is the book that Steve Jobs read every single year of his life. It's the only book that he read every single year of his life. So it has a lot of wisdom.
Oh, I knew there was a reason why I got it. That must have been it. I couldn't remember what it was. That's wild. Okay, I'm going to read. I've noticed that with different things, but books being one of them. There's that wonderful saying, no man steps in the same river twice, because he's not the same man and it's not the same river. And it's the same with, if you read an impactful book 10, 20 years later, if you go back and read it, you have you're a completely different person. So you take different things from it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting back to that. Can I ask you, you talk a lot about your childhood, and it reminded me, I don't know if you're familiar with David Goggins, but his childhood and your childhood share some similarities. And it was, you both had a very tough childhood. And I was thinking, I'm a parent of a 4-year-old, and I try to give him so much love and support and everything. And there's a part of me, I almost worry, because I think there's something, not that I want him to have an abusive childhood, but there's something about pressure making diamonds. And I feel like you might not be the person you are today if you hadn't been through such a tough childhood. Do you think there's some truth to that? Like, do you imagine in a parallel universe, if you didn't have the hard things that you had to overcome as a young girl, you wouldn't be quite the person you are today?
I mean, 100%. I feel that my childhood was what it needed to be. It was part of my soul's curriculum on this planet. And because I came here on the earth with a mission, and it took me a while to figure out, wow, I'm actually here to fulfill this mission on the planet. I began to learn and understand that all of these very, very deeply challenging experiences of my life were part of the crystallization to support me in understanding my mission and to have the resilience and the strength to serve it. So, had I had a different experience, I would not be an advocate against child abuse on the planet, which I believe is very much a part of my mission. And I think that I had that particular experience, especially in a Black family, because within the Black culture, beating is normal. It's been normalized. And even when I share my story with people of the Black community, I say, yeah, in my book, I share about this. People are like, yeah, but everybody experienced that. Everyone had that experience. And it's interesting that as my book is getting out there in the world, and I'm talking to more friends and colleagues and clients that I've worked with, people are telling me how my story resonated so much with theirs. And the thing about that particular experience for me as a child is that I couldn't get over it. It was always this memory in my mind that even I did therapy work in college, even though I had tried, I did everything I could to forgive my family, it just kept lingering. And I was still 40 years old, meeting a shaman. And the question that he asked asked me is, how can I help you? And I break down crying, telling him the story of when I was 5. So that particular moment it just helped to catalyze my healing and a deeper understanding of how to heal trauma so that I can be of service to others.
Yeah, that's such a wild thought now as a parent, thinking some of the things happening to him today could impact the future when he's 30 or 40. And actually, my first childhood memory was when I was 4 years old and I was in London and my parents lost me. And I ended up getting into a random person's car who took me to a police station. And I just remember my dad finding me, going to the police station, finding me, and just grabbing me by the shoulders, tears running down his face, saying, "What did I tell you to do if I ever got lost from you?" And I said, "You said don't move." And he said, "Yes, why did you get in some guy's car? Don't see you again." And it's so wild thinking that memory must have been so strong. So I remember it so vividly, imprinted. And now,
Yeah.
the age where, just say I lost my temper and I did something I'm not proud of, he might remember that forever. It's wild thinking about how the memory works.
It's wild. Yeah. And I mean, thank God you were safe, right? But yeah, these moments, I mean, mine was extremely traumatic, but that moment of being lost could be a pattern that repeats throughout your life until you decide to heal it at the root.
And that's one thing. My wife's a therapist, and her particular style of therapy is to go back in people's past and find out there's so many things that happen to us when we're young, and that might be causing us to self-sabotage a marriage in 20 years or something, just by going back to our roots. So I think and I'm sure just when you write an autobiographical book, just the process of doing it has got to be so good for just organizing your thoughts and just your memories and how you became the person you are today. It must be so, yes, it must be a really good experience for your soul, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. The book has been quite cathartic for me to go back. And especially when I got more serious and more committed. And when I wrote the early years, I definitely had a re experiencing of those events. And so an opportunity to go back and heal them again at another layer of processing that I hadn't done previously. It was very powerful. And I'm just so happy that I've completed this because that particular memoir only goes up to, I want to say 2018 in my life. And so I definitely want to create another memoir that kind of leads up to where I ended up here in Bali. So it just feels good to have completed it. I held those stories inside of me for so long. I've been on a different journey since since the end of that book. It's taken me on this like incredible journey of awakening and discovery from my personal life. And so I'm just excited to be complete, to be honest. But absolutely, it was wonderful to organize it. And yeah, just to see all of these moments that have shaped who I am. I just had so much gratitude for the people and my ancestors and the processes that life has brought me to enable me to live this life that I live now. Which my son says, Mom, he's like, that you live one of the most rarest epic lives a human can live. And I was like, wow, I never actually thought about it that way.
That's what a beautiful compliment from him. And I was going through some trolls with I was all in with this business partner in 2020, and he ended up screwing me over, but it ended up being lawsuits that just finished now 5 years later. It's one of those things where in the midst of it, I was really bummed out. It was really getting me down. And I had this realization. I said, I can just reframe this. And I can say that this is making me a more complex person. And so if my son ever gets in lawsuits down the road, I can explain to him, listen, I've been through this. It sucks, but you'll get through the other side. And I thought I can reframe every single problem in my life as just something that gives me more wisdom as a parent. And ultimately, when all's said and done, I would like him to say the same thing about my life. And I think if there's one thing that drives me, it's like, I want to live an uncommon life. So that's a really beautiful compliment. And that's the reading, you grew up on the East Coast and you didn't have much opportunities, but you managed to get a scholarship to go to an Ivy League college. Then you're very successful. Oh, no, before you work in LA, You have this time in Africa that was real special. You climb Mount Kilimanjaro, which is awesome. I climbed that in Tanzania, and I had such an incredible experience. I went back with my dad, and we climbed Mount Meru, which is the one next to it that you can actually see peeking through the clouds, which is it's a lot less commercial, and it's easier, but it's a bit. I felt a bit more. That was a bit more spiritual for me because there's just a lot less people there, and it was the one that all the locals say you have to come back and climb Mount Meru. So I did that with my dad, and when we finished, we went to Tanzania. Sorry, to Zanzibar, the island. And I remember when we got to the airport, there was a group of kids playing a makeshift soccer game on the beach, and the sun was going down, and they were, barefoot. They looked like they had almost nothing, but they looked so happy. And I remember my dad and I were talking about it, and we said, look at that. We come from the West where so many people have all this abundance of things, and they live lives of quiet desperation. They're miserable. They've got health problems, and they're just depressed. And now everyone's all these medications for depression. And it's a real. The Western society seems like a profoundly sick society. And you see these kids with nothing who just seem so happy, and they're out there with their friends, laughing, playing makeshift soccer. And it seemed like you had that same kind of experience where you were really connected with the humanity of Africa. And then when you came back, you were kind of like that reverse culture shock. And I know I was reading it last night. I was like, I know exactly what you mean, because I see that same, I see these people with everything to be grateful for, and they're miserable. And then these other people, they have absolutely nothing, and somehow they seem happy.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you got to see that, because I have to say that being in Africa was extraordinary, right? To see giraffe. I'd never in my life seen a herd of animals running through a savanna, thousands of giraffe, mind-blowing elephants with their whole entire families and lineages, but the children, and to see their joy and how much they love life, how present they are, how connected to the magic of life they are, that changed me on a fundamental level. And I have to say that was, it was some of the most profound learnings of my life, to meet people who had nothing, who were willing to invite you into their home to sit down and have tea, who were willing to create a bed and a place for me to stay. And they had just met me over coffee at a local bar. It's profound. I not only found like the humanity of Africa, I felt like I found the spirit of humanity itself in Africa. And it was definitely challenging to go back. I remember when I was traveling, I lived in Africa for 6 months, and all I really wanted was a Western shower, and I wanted my mom's home cooking, and I wanted to, I think I just wanted some of the comforts of being in the States. And when I came back and I realized just how it felt soulless in comparison to what I experienced in Africa, I was definitely in a state of shock, and it caused depression for a short period of time.
And then going to LA, I feel like I don't want to talk about LA. That I've got a lot of friends that live there, and the way they describe it is there's a lot of wonderful people in LA, but there's also this thing where they're just trying to make it, and there's a lot of people just struggling, hoping for that lucky break. And it seems like there's a lot of people living that they call it the quiet desperation, where they're desperate, and they're barely surviving, but they're hoping, they've got the hope that success is just around the corner. Whereas for me, I moved to the Midwest. I actually moved, I was working in New York for a while, and then I moved to Chicago. And coming from England, I love the people in the Midwest. I feel like they're very genuine. They're just, what you see is what you get. And I love the Midwestern people. I think they're much, for me, they're the most, can I say, just the most authentic people I've met in the US is from the Midwest. They have very little pretense. And Chicago in particular, there's something about the mentality of the people here that I absolutely love.
I completely agree. I feel like, I mean, there's that perception about LA, right? That people are hustling, and the energy of hustle, of desperation is there, because if you think about it, it has this history where so many people have traveled from around the world and have created extraordinary success and have fulfilled their dreams. A small handful of people have. And so that energy definitely pervades Los Angeles. But because I became a young mother, and immediately within maybe a year or two of me moving to LA, I became a mother. My life experience in LA was quite different, because a lot of the people that I connected with were parents and families. And it's very, like, I meet a lot of grounded people in Los Angeles, incredible people. And so in general, the culture for sure is as you described it. But I also, I do a lot of work in the Midwest. I have a strong community there, and I love Midwestern people. They're very salt of the earth, I would say. And I can't, because I work with people from all over the world, I can't say that they're the most authentic of Americans that I know. I grew up on the East Coast. Like, East Coast people are extremely authentic to me. I know people from the South, they are extremely authentic to their culture. But I would say that Midwestern people they're just so genuine, you know? And it's such a good feeling.
So you talk a lot about, you write a lot about these dreams you have. And you wrote, I remember when you were young, you had something like 8 or 9 nights in a row where you had a dream that you were running and you were shot. And can you talk a little bit about dreams? Because dreams are so fascinating. You know, Freud wrote so much about them. And I've had some very vivid dreams. And then I had a period a few years ago where I realized I'm barely dreaming, and it kind of bothered me. I was like, is something wrong with me? I'm not really having dreams. I'm just knocked out. And then recently I've been dreaming more, which made me really happy. But your dreams are particularly unusual. You know, I've never heard of anybody having the same dream, 2 consecutive nights, let alone, multiple dreams. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's fascinating to me.
Yes, it's interesting. So I had the exact same dream 7 days in a row when I was 16 years old. And I have to say that I was a dreamer. I remember my dreams when I was young. I continued being a dreamer throughout my 20s and 30s. But that dream in particular, it was so detailed. And I was shot and I died in the dream. So I think also a lot of times people talk about having dreams of death, but they don't actually die. They never see themselves dying. And so the fact that I died and I was killed, it shook me to my core. That is what made me become an atheist, actually, because I said, if this seems like it's a sign, even though I was 16 and I didn't quite know very much about myself or the world, it was such a powerful sign that I had to make a decision to stop believing what the world was telling me. And that is what shifted me to really decide to experience life and form my ideologies, form my belief systems based around my personal experience of life. But dreaming is powerful. Some people believe that dreaming is just another realm of creation, and the Ashwar people of the Amazon, they are a community, a culture of dreamers. Same with the indigenous people of Australia. They dream their creations, they dream the future, they collectively dream a new world for us. And so I've been in a really beautiful, interesting dance and understanding dreams, and I believe that they're extremely powerful in helping us unravel the psyche.
So what was I guess, can we start with can we continue down the road, I guess, of you finding out that you were a little bit different in terms of just the visions you had, and then that path that took you down? Because I think that for me is the most fascinating thing about you.
Yeah, I had this feeling that I was different. I think that it didn't really come together until I was in my 20s. Even though I had that series of dreams, I wasn't aware of how different it was until later, upon reflecting on it, maturing, as a human. But I questioned why I was so different for the longest time, because I actually had spiritual knowledge that I could readily share with anyone who would enter my life. And it wasn't something that I learned. It wasn't part of my family. I come from a very, very normal, regular American Black family. And so I was always questioning, where is this information coming from? Even I had recently had a conversation with one of my college friends, and she said, Vonetta, I'm just starting this path of healing. I just turned 50. And I remember when we were in college that you were telling me that you were healing your ancestral lineage. And here we are, like 27 years later, 30 years later, and I'm just now starting that journey, but you were doing that 30 years ago. So how was I able to even know about these things, to start that process? And so the difference that it also has made me feel like isolated. I felt like I didn't belong to this world for a long time. I felt like I wanted to leave this world because I didn't feel that sense of belonging with a lot of people. And so it's been an interesting journey. Thank goodness that I followed every step, every little breadcrumb, because every little breadcrumb that God or spirit or creator, whatever you use, love, a higher power, put in front of me, my higher self, helped me to understand who I was and where these gifts come from. And I've come to understand that we all have these gifts. Mine are unique to my soul and my soul path. But it's been interesting. It's wonderful on one hand, but it also created a deep isolation for me. And I think when I started sharing and getting into these journey communities, which you're going to read about, and I started meeting people of my tribe, which was so important. Like we're discovering, oh my God, we're a tribe, right? We have this kindred connection, and we're like kindred spirits too. But when I started meeting people who were from my tribe, a lot of people are empaths, and they were telling me the same thing, that for the longest time they just could not feel a sense of belonging here.
Going back to that, when I said when I was young, I was very much like, it's what you can see and experience. Everything else, I don't even care for. That was my old mentality. But talking about just even something as simple as energy, I remember that business partner that ended up screwing me over. He was perfect on paper. He had everything right on paper. But every time I was around him, I had this feeling like I just wanted to get away. And I'd always ask myself, what is wrong with me? Like, why do I feel like this way? And it's only now when I look back, I'm like, I could just tell that was my energy. I was getting repelled from his energy. Like my senses knew it, but my brain, I was overriding what I intuitively should have listened to. And I think that's something that I'm really trying to, as I get older. One of the things my wife and I do with parenting is I've read a lot of parenting books, because when I became a dad, I was an older dad, and I wasn't around I didn't have younger brothers or younger cousins. So I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. So I read a lot of parenting books, and I got a few things, but the biggest thing I got was all the things that I would intuitively do was just confirmed by all the learning I did. And I think that makes sense, because we've been raising children for thousands and thousands of years. So intuitively, you should know what to do if you listen to yourself. And I think that's the problem with a lot of the Western society is a lot of us might have gifts, maybe not the extent of your gifts, but or other empaths, but you have these gifts, and you have this inside you, and you override it because you don't even think about it. You wake up, you're stressed, you're tired, you got to get ready for work, you got to do a soul crushing job you hate for 8 hours. You come home, you're exhausted, you try and get to work, and then you barely can get some food and watch some TV before starting the whole day again. Like we live this overstimulated lives, and so we forget about listening to our intuition. So I think that's so beautiful about what you just said is you went down this journey and you actually listened to it, and that must have been that in itself is really impressive.
Thank you. It hasn't been easy, I have to say, but similar to you, I read so many baby books. I read so many parenting books when I was a young mother because I felt like I didn't have enough life experience. I was quite young when I became a mother, and very similar that when I used my intuition, it was always confirmed that that was the solution. And my intuition just came online actually when I was pregnant with my son. That's where I developed or first activated my gift of clairaudience, where I could hear directly from spirit source, direct messages. And it took me a while. I remember when I was driving to work one day and that intuition told me to go left. But every time I took this route to work, I always went straight down Melrose. Why would I ever go left? And immediately, boom, I hit this accident. There are fire trucks, there's ambulance. And I had this realization, oh, wow, that voice was trying to help me. That voice was trying to protect me. And it still took, I mean, I've been developing this gift for 35, no, 25 years now, 26 years, 27 years now. And I still struggle to listen to it because we've been so conditioned to follow these pathways of creation, these pathways within our lives. And I believe that our intuition is our highest compass for creating the most satisfying, easeful, blissful life that we can create for ourselves. And so I love that you're using your intuition, that it's being affirmed, especially in parenting, because every child is so different. That's what I learned from being a parent. It's like, wow, like my son was so different from me, so different from every other child that I know. I could only be in the moment and listen for what he needed to provide what he needed in that moment. So yeah, I hope that more people lean into trusting their intuition. But as you said, like with these lives that we lead, where it's like you're in the soul crushing job and you just come home and you want to numb that experience, it's really hard to break out of that cycle. And that's why tools like meditation, breath work, just walking in nature, journaling, having a daily practice can help you get in touch with yourself and pull you away from that world that wants to compartmentalize you or numb you or overstimulate you so that you can actually be with yourself and have that quiet space to listen to the wisdom that's coming through.
I have a very wise friend, and for years he was telling me, he'd always say, Lawrence, you need more space. And I've only started to realize what he meant the last few years. And it's what you're saying about just, breath work or meditation. You're just taking a break from incoming stimuli, and you can actually just let your mind go to places it wants to go, and you can just calm down. Or like you said, going for a walk, being in nature. I think it's such a tonic to the technologically overwhelming world that most people spend most of their day in. Just leaving I moved from Chicago to Northwest Indiana, and that was one of the reasons I wanted my son to grow up where he can walk outside and be on some grass on his bare feet, or he can go in the backyard and there's trees, and just wild out there. I wanted him to have that kind of upbringing, not living in a high rise Chicago where I'm worried about him going anywhere without me because it can be a little dangerous. So something like that. So the problem most people have is they're juggling the need to pay the bills with the need to be fulfilled. And that's why it's awesome that your journey's led you to be in Bali right now, where you seem very calm. I don't know if you're stressed about your bills, but it's one. I feel like that's the challenge, isn't it? It's like money is a wonderful tool, an amplifier, and it can give you wonderful experiences and do awesome things. But it's also can be a bit of a chain. And you talked about that when you got married, and you said you were good. You had your own place with your son, and you had you're supporting yourself. You had a good job, and then you gave it all up for your husband, but you knew him from when you were younger, and then you ended up being trapped because he transferred everything in his name, and then you had that realization that like now I'm kind of financially trapped, and I feel like that's so many people must be in that same situation. That's such a horrible feeling to feel like you're trapped in a situation you don't want to be because the finances are a real thing.
It is such a real thing. And it's something that I think we all are learning how to navigate for ourselves. In my experience with it, I never I never quite felt there were some moments where I definitely felt trapped by finances, but I would say I was trapped more by an entire life situation because even though you're hustling to pay those bills and I was able to live a really beautiful lifestyle from it, there was some part of my soul that did not feel fulfilled. And I think that what's unique about me is that was the most important thing for me. Having the courage to live my soul's path was more important
Yes.
than the path of materialism that I think I was very much a part of it. I used to chase after it. I remember when I had my husband and our big house, I fell into that trap. I wanted to have a really expensive purse and really expensive shoes so that when we would go out and have nice dinners, I looked the part, but there was some part of my soul that still was not fulfilled. And when it was actually my shaman that he was able to see through those masks and help reflect back to me who my true self was. And I have to say that since I devoted myself to my path of service, I never have struggled with money. I've never worried about paying my bills. The path of service it's worked out miraculously that I've just been given everything that I need. And it's not something that I stress about. Of course, I want to create more wealth only because I want to create sanctuaries and I want to create centers and I want to create a research center. And, so I do want to generate more wealth to have a bigger impact on the planet. So it's a goal, but it's not something that I stress about. And yeah, I feel blessed that being able to walk this path of my soul has enabled me to release that financial stress that I used to carry, even when I was, at the top of my game, the most successful as a graphic designer. So
Well,
it's real.
that what you said though is perfect because there's people can want money for two major things. And one of them is to buy things they don't need or just to win the status game, to look good in front of their friends. And I've been reading a lot about these people that are billionaires who are incredibly unhappy because maybe they have 10 billion and they look at someone with 100 billion and say, oh, I'm not Elon Musk. And it's this whole game. Like if you play that game, you're always going to be a loser in life. Whereas if you play the game like you said, I want to create wealth to do these amazing things in life, in the world. That's a very different game you're playing. That's using money as a tool to make your life and the world a better place. And I think that's beautiful because that's exactly how I see wealth. I want money, but it's not to impress anybody or buy things I don't need. It's to make a difference in the world. It's an amplifier. And I think that's what you said is spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's for me, becoming a steward of money and resources is the highest game that I can play in life. And I have to say that I don't think all billionaires think that way, that they're chasing after. I know quite a few who are extremely generous and also choose to use their resources to have a greater impact. But that cycle of chasing after the next thing is exhausting. It doesn't fulfill us. It doesn't bring satisfaction. And yeah, it's interesting.
I was just reading this book about this tech founder. His name's Andrew Wilkinson, and I think it's called Never Enough. And he was just saying that when he became a billionaire and he started meeting these other billionaires, he was just like, it was the same story again and again and again. But of course, that's not an indication of every billionaire. It's kind of like saying, there's a lot of superficial people in LA, but that doesn't mean there's not a lot of wonderful people in LA too. These generalizations we throw out there, they're not indicative of everybody. So yeah, I'm really glad you said that. That's very true. But Vonetta, back to you kind of following this path of realizing that you had these gifts, because that's where I got up to in your biography. So what was the next step after that?
So after realizing that I had these gifts, the next step was trying to figure out who I was. because I'm like, I have these gifts. I'm having these very unique experiences that people would not understand. Even when I shared it with people in my world, they're like, nobody talks to God. And I'm trying to explain, no, you don't understand. Like, God is speaking to me. So I think the next step for me was to understand who I was. And from that place of understanding who I am, from there, I did a deeper dive of healing the traumatic patterns of my life. And there were many. I mean, I was dealing with father issues, a father wound, a mother wound. I had relationship issues. Even financial issues. I didn't feel like my life was operating at its most optimal level. You talked about how we get trapped in these places, and once I understood who I was, I really wanted to heal every aspect of my life so that everything was operating through a system of harmony, so that I was feeling whole, and just peace has always been something that I have sought, that I've worked for, which is why I became a meditator at a really young age when I was a single mom, juggling work and parenthood. Meditation was the pillar that allowed me to create a sense of peace and harmony in the home and in my life. But I still had so many issues that I was working with. So the next step was figuring out, who am I? And also I discovered who I was through the deeper healing process. And then after that, it was like stepping fully into being of service.
So can I ask, if anyone's listening to this, I feel like anyone that heard what you just said would say, yeah, I want the same thing too. So like, obviously I know not just who we are, but I want to work on past traumas and I want to optimize myself so I can be the best me to go through life. Is there anything that you can, I guess, some kind of generalizations, like how do people do that, if that makes sense?
It's a great question. I can share what my process has been. To be honest, I was a meditator, so that definitely helped me to understand more of who I was. And meditation has been my number one medicine, my number one tool in life. It's something that I've returned to, something that I practice daily. And even being a meditator for 33 years now, there are moments in my life where I'm not meditating consistently every day, and I can feel the difference. So I would say, find a practice that works for you. If it's not meditating, then journal. But to go deep, even though I was a meditator, I had a spiritual mentor. I meditated 2 hours a day. I sometimes dedicated my entire Saturday to 12 hours of meditation. I'm a devotee, and I was deeply initiated into a lineage of meditation.
So what does that look like? Can you take me through one of the, that's fascinating. 12 hours of meditation on a Saturday. Can you kind of describe that a little bit more?
Yeah. So my mentor, my spiritual mentor, Brother Bhaktananda, he would often invite me, and he had a group experience where people would come into a sacred space. And he would guide us into a meditation process where, for the first maybe 10 to 15 minutes, we would be in chant. So we would be chanting mantras, chanting songs that he would guide with a harmonium that he would play. And then the next 45 minutes, we would be in stillness and quiet and silence. I worked with Kriya Yoga, which is the meditation practice that I use. And it's a process of beginning to silence the mind through a mantra that I repeat, and then breath work that I move up and down my body to bring more light, more energy, and a spiritual power through my form. But we would do that, and we would have little breaks. So at the top of the hour, you could always go to the bathroom or drink water. There would be a break for lunch. But during the 12 hours, we were consistently meditating at the top of the hour with chanting and breaks. But I want to say that even though I had all of that experience, it wasn't until I stepped into the shamanic path that I actually went into the patterns, because shamanic work, plant medicine work, is what we call shadow work. So you're able to examine and see all the different shadow areas of your life, the darkness in your life. And we say darkness, but it's really wounding, it's past life trauma, it's present life trauma, it's ancestral patterns that don't serve you. And it was only until I did shamanic work that I was able to really dive deep into that. I mean, I think that psychotherapy is another way, but I have psychotherapists that I've worked with, and they told me that one night of shamanic plant medicine ceremony work was equivalent to 10 years of work in psychotherapy. And this is coming from a psychotherapist. So I highly recommend plant medicine. I mean, it's the path, it's what I do. I've witnessed thousands of people transform their lives through it. So I'm an advocate for plant medicine. I mean, I think that's why I became the shaman's apprentice.
I have a really good friend in LA, and he says that he can divide his life into two. And the first one was before he ever did ayahuasca in Peru, and the second half of his life is after that. And he's done many different ceremonies. And I remember when I actually met him in Zanzibar when I was there with my dad, and we hit it off. And at the end of the trip, he said to me, he said, I kind of mentioned like, oh, I'm hearing must be close to 10 years ago. I said, I've heard people talk about ayahuasca being so changing. And he said, don't worry, when the time's right, we're going to do it together. And then a few years later, he contacted me and he said, I'm getting a group of guys together to this, in Joshua Tree, to this Native American place, and we're going to do an ayahuasca ceremony. And I went there because I've spent a lifetime. So unlike you, I had a very nice upbringing. So I felt like I don't have too many demons from my past. I think I was very blessed to live in the bubble that I had, a very nice bubble that I'm trying to give my son. I had a very nice upbringing. And I think the demons that I had were all about, as a man, trying to prove myself to myself, if that makes sense. Like so I loved martial arts and competing because it terrified me. And I was always the shy, introverted kid in school. So for me, fighting was a way of facing my fears. I did that for many, many, many years. And so when I did ayahuasca, I was so curious because I had spent a lifetime facing my fears in my passions, my sports. And I was a trader in the Chicago Board of Trade. So I was a pit trader. I was the youngest guy in the pit. It was an incredibly intense environment for a decade. So that was very scary and intense. And I feel like that formed me as well. And then I spent a lifetime reading. I've been very curious. So when you put all that together, I was like, I hear people talk about it. And I was like, well, what am I missing? And so when I did it, we did 2 nights, and it was a beautiful group of guys, and I'm friends with a lot of them to this day. And one of them had a terrible reaction because he had a lot of past trauma with his youth, and he had to be restrained, and he was screaming and hurting himself. And it was tough. It was tough because you were listening to it. It was kind of right there. But my experience was very different. And I wanted to ask you, because for me, it was almost like I was seeing myself, and I was looking at myself saying, stop searching. It's right there in front of you, and just be. So that's why I'm so fascinated by when you say the meditation, because I feel like when I meditate or I do breath work or do something where it's just me, that's when I can slow down and I can just be appreciative for what I have. So instead of looking forward to what I want, like most people are always like, oh, if I can get this, I'll be happy. And they're always searching. It told me just to appreciate what I have. And I came out profoundly just grateful, and just, I felt like I had a lot more love for myself, but also for everyone else. I felt like I was a more loving person, very different from, it was, I think, just when I retired from fighting. And one of the reasons I retired from fighting is because I never wanted to hurt people. I did it in the sporting aspect, but like I never enjoyed it. Like I'm a nice person, but I felt like after that ceremony, I had a lot more love in me. And I was like, well, I felt afterwards, I felt like I kind of expected more. So then we did another ceremony a year later, and my wife was pregnant. And it was a 2-day ceremony. And after the first day, the medicine told me, like, you shouldn't be here. Your wife needs you, get back. So I'm one of those people that I hate stopping things halfway through. And I told the guys, I said, guys, I'm so sorry, I have to go. I got a last minute flight. I flew home to be with my wife. And so I just wonder, like, when I tell you that, because you yourself have experienced so much from it. And like you said, that was an incredible story. A therapist, as someone spent 10 years in therapy, got the same result from one plant medicine experience. Is it just that I wasn't open to it? Is it just that it wasn't the right modality for me because everyone's different? I'm so curious to know your thoughts on that.
That's an interesting question. First of all, I just love the whole thread of what you shared. It's really nice to understand more of your history of how you stepped into fighting. And I love to hear when people have not had traumatic experiences as children because it's rare. And I hope that we create a world with more people like you who have not had traumatic experiences, like what you're doing for your son. But with the plant medicine ceremony, that experience of that one person who had all of those demons and was having that really challenging experience, that doesn't happen all the time. I had a very traumatic childhood and a lot of dysfunction in my childhood, and I never had an experience like that with plant medicine. But with you in particular, I would say that it's not for everyone. And I believe that it's one avenue, of course. And just like you said, even though you didn't have trauma, you had shadow patterns that you wanted to work through. This really, really dismantling almost like a toxic masculine paradigm that you were raised in, the desire for you to not hurt people, but to really shift your life to be more loving, more conscious, more present, more self-aware. I think that you were doing amazing work. And just that one belief that you received of it's all right here. It's like you can spend the rest of your life contemplating in meditation that thought and bring yourself into deeper and deeper and deeper states of awareness. So I would say that go if you're called. If for sure the medicine told you needed to be home with your wife, of course, if she's if she's having a baby, that's where you need to be. But I would say that yeah, it's not everyone. It's not for everyone. And for me and with everyone that I work with, they actually come when they're called. When they're called, they show up. And when it works for you, you're in it. When I found it and I experienced something so profound. So my first plant medicine journey, I took 10 breaths, and I don't think you're there in the book yet, but you actually have gotten there. But I took those 10 breaths.
That's just where I'm getting to, and then that's what I got.
Oh, okay. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it was such a profound experience for me that I needed to understand more. I had been a meditator. I had very vast experiences, and it was so life-changing that I just had to understand more. So that was my impetus to try it more. And then, of course, as you'll learn from reading my book, I have this old soul relationship with my shaman and a contract with him to show up to be his apprentice. So I obviously had to dive in deep. But for most people, it's if you're called to it, yes. If there's like a tingling sensation when you hear the words, you have to go. I even have worked with people, doctors, who've told me, oh yeah, like it's been in my field for 10 years where people have invited me, but I never felt right until I met you. And so you also need to make sure that you're going to the right experience, because what you experience with someone like going ballistic, that could traumatize someone just from being there. There's a range.
So can I ask, Vanessa, so do you take people through plant medicine where you're there, so they're deep in it and you're there obviously not partaking, but just looking after them? Is that what you do?
Yeah, so that has become my work, where I've actually led over 800 ceremonies where I am the facilitator. And those 800 ceremonies happened over the last 13 years, 12 years, where I guide people through a journey. So they have been community ceremonies. I've done a lot of community work where we decided then that it's better to do women's ceremonies, where I was just working with the women, just working with the men within a community. Then I would often do private ceremonies for couples or individuals who need more hands-on facilitation. But Yes, I do all of that. I guide people through the entire process. I don't partake during that experience. That's not a part of our lineage. I know that with some ayahuasca traditions, people will also the shaman will partake with the medicine as they're guiding others. But in our lineage, we stay completely sober, clean, pure, awake, and present because so many things can come up.
Mm. But the second experience I had, so it was in the desert and we were all outside, and then I just wanted to be by myself. So I went for a little walk and there was a bench there, and I was sitting there, and one of the there was, I think there's about 12 of us and maybe six shamans, and one of them came out just to make sure I was okay, and he just sat there, and we sat there together, and we shared a few words, but he just sat there for a while, and then he said, "I can tell you're fine," and he left. And it was it just reminded me of that moment. It was a really beautiful moment. But I was sitting there, and I just remember thinking, all the like the f- I had the funniest thing. I had an ex-girlfriend who was I had a very toxic relationship with just before I met my wife, and definitely wasn't my best self, and she wasn't her best self. And I remember sitting there thinking, I felt so bad about the way I was. I was like, I'm so much better than that. And I was like, I'm going to send her a text and apologize. And then I realized that I didn't have her number for that reason. I didn't want to open go down that route. But it was just that feeling both times is just, it made me a very loving person. And I can say that parenthood actually did the same thing, where I really love what you said about with your son, and what I'm seeing with my son is they're so different. Like, you can't take advice from someone that wrote a book, even if they're the best parent ever and they've got experience with 1,000 children, because they're not your child, and we're all so unique and individual. But I feel like since I've become a parent, I think I'm probably 2 or 3 times more loving as a person. I just think, like, I see people that in the past I would have really disliked, and now I always have love and sympathy for their pain, if that makes sense. So it's yeah, that's the biggest thing with plant medicine, is I think it made me a more grateful and more loving person. But I'm so glad you said what you said. You said I could spend a lifetime meditating on those thoughts, and you're so right. Like, the biggest thing, that the gift you've given me is, I've got to get back to meditating more, because that's the tonic to my life. Is I work in real estate and I'm just overstimulated all day. It's a very unique job that it's entrepreneurial, so I can craft my days how I want them, but it's also a 7 day a week kind of job. And from I just yeah, that's such a gift for me. And I feel like for most people that I know who live in the Midwest and they're professionals and they work a lot, they can all do with the same wisdom. Is just slowing down and just spending some more time with yourself, and working inward. I think that's just so powerful.
Thank you for sharing that. And to your point that you became more loving through the plant medicine experience, I would say that that is probably the number one result, that across the board, what most people feel is that they become more connected. So they become more connected to themselves, to their hearts, to the earth, which is a big thing because a lot of people are very disconnected from the earth, but they become more loving. I think, I mean, if more and more people just become more loving, that's wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful that you became more loving, becoming a parent. I became more loving, becoming a parent. But I also work with a lot of parents who, as much as they love their children and they love them so much, I don't want, they love them to death, right? But they also are so stressed that they're not present with their children. And a lot of the parents that I've worked with, plant medicine has helped them to become more present, so that when they're with their children, even if they have so much love, if they could not connect because they were so stressed before, really not present, up in the mind, trying to figure things out, trying to deal with life, the journeys, the ceremonies allowed them to be present so that they can actually feel that love, reciprocate that love, receive that love of the child. So there's just a lot. There was a lot that I could share, but I just wanted to share that little bit about what you said.
Can I please ask you, as someone who's obviously your son's an adult now, when I look back at my life, I feel like when you're a kid, you just want to fit in, right? You want to be as average as you can and fit in with everyone else. And then when you're older and wiser, I think it's incredible that compliment your son gave you, where he said, you've had an awesome, unique life, like so different and cool, traveled the world and you've done all these cool things. That is the goal when you're older. So I'm trying to, with my son, he's incredibly unique. So I pick him up from preschool and all the kids are on one side and he'll be in his own world doing something else. And they all know his name and I was like, oh, who's that? And he's like, oh, I don't know. And then they're like, bye, Victor. Like they know him. Like he's definitely in his own world. And so as a parent, of course, I worry because I want him to fit in and have friends and be accepted. But I know as an adult, that's actually a great thing that he's so unique and different. Does that make sense? So as a parent, is there any wisdom you could give me on how I can kind of think about that?
It's so interesting that you share that because my son was the same. I remember when I picked him up from school when he was in kindergarten and I'm walking him through this big like schoolyard and every kid is like, hey Mars, hey Mars, hey Mars, hey Mars, bye Mars, bye Mars. And I'm like, do you know who these kids are? And he's like, Mom, I have no idea who these kids are. And he was like, your son, he's extremely focused.
Yeah.
He could go off and do his own thing. I remember one time when he was in soccer and he was playing goalie and he's like in the net, just like looking up at the net, watching the sun. And I'm like, for a minute, I thought, does he have autism? I actually had him checked and they're like, no, actually your 7-year-old is operating at a 9th grade intellect. And so I'm like, oh, okay. He's operating on a higher frequency. I would say from my experience of raising a child like this, the most important thing was to listen to him, that he had intelligence about his life that I didn't have. And I think often we parent based on our own childhood experiences, things that worked for us, we would impose, so I was doing things that, didn't work for me that I would try to make them better. The things that did work with me, I would try to enforce, as a parent. But the most important thing that I learned from having a child like this is he knows. He has known since he was really young who he is, what he's here to do. And so the advice is to help to build his esteem so that he feels really confident being the being that he is, that he's here to be on this planet.
That's such good advice. And that's something that I've really learned the last few years is when he was born, I was like, okay, I have in my head the idea of all the things that I think he should do to be the best him. And now I've realized that he's not a mini me, he's him, and he's very different. And so I have to try and figure out how to best nurture himself to figure out his own path. Because one of my big pet peeves in parenting is parents. I see it in the jiu-jitsu world. You'll see these parents that have never done any sports in their life, and they're screaming and berating their 10-year-old because he lost a jiu-jitsu match. And it's just, I hate that kind of parenting. I want to be the complete opposite. But at the same time, I'm also aware that he doesn't need a friend. He also needs a parent sometimes. So I have to tell him sometimes things he's not going to want to hear because, I'm his parent. I'm not his friend. But yeah, he's been the best thing for my happiness. But I think just like with plant medicine and parenting, it's everybody has things that they don't know. And I think that's what's so interesting about life. And that's what I'm trying to be much more open to is I didn't know how much I'd changed 5 years ago from today because of him. And like you said, these people that my good friend who I did the ceremony with the first time, it literally changed his life. He said, my life is in two from that one ceremony. And I think it's so wonderful that's one of the things about technology and podcasting. And you hear these stories. I first heard about plant medicine through a podcast just like this. And it's like, you get exposed to these things you never thought about, and it can completely transform your life in a positive way. So I think that's so beautiful. And it's crazy how many ceremonies that you've done. Are you doing that in Bali? You're doing the ceremonies there?
No, I actually don't lead any ceremonies in Bali. I've only done that in places where it's more legal, I would say. And also since the pandemic, a lot of that work I did pre-pandemic. Since the pandemic, it shut down travel, global travel, and I was traveling around the world to guide these ceremonies. And so since the pandemic, I've reoriented my life. I don't actually lead as many as I used to. And I do more mentoring and spiritual coaching, which has always been a part of my work. I started a mystery school in 2015, and I have these initiates that find me. Like they say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and people will just show up in my life. And so I guide them through an initiatory practice without plant medicine. And it's a process of helping them, of reconnecting them to their energy center, reconnecting them to their deeper intuition, like aligning all of their chakras, and using sacred geometry and somatic tools, breath work, meditation to live their soul fulfilling lives. So I don't do as much of it.
Let me ask you. So, what you said there about how, what do they say? When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. How do people be more open? One thing in your memoir, you talk a lot about just like almost the chance meetings. Like there was that one time where you had all that spam email at 3 in the morning and you're just kind of deleting it all. And then like, no, I'm going to open this one. You open it, you have an appointment the next day. Like, how do people go through their life, I guess, being more open to these kind of connections that letting, I don't want to say the universe, but just, being open to things that enrich you, as opposed to a lot of type A people are like, they would never reopen an email, for that. They wouldn't listen to that feeling. If they had the feeling, they just override it because they have 20 things to do on their to-do list because they want to be really efficient today. How do people like that be a bit more like you in that sense? Be more open to things.
I mean, you are so on point. Like that is exactly how people are. And I remember when I was in the beginning stages of, I call it an initiation of stepping deeper into this path that I'm in. When I would tell people, "Oh, you're not going to believe what I did," and they said, like, how do you even say yes to that, Vonetta? Like, how are you saying yes?" And I would say that for me, the reason why I said yes is number one, I started listening to my intuition when I was 23 years old, 24 years old. And so it was a slowly developing gift. And the more I listened to it, the more I trusted it, the more I recognized, wow, this gift serves me higher than any thoughts of my mind. The gift is bringing me to experiences that actually elevate me to a higher place, a higher understanding, a higher learning than what I could have consciously thought of or read in a book or experienced through something that is conditional or that has been conditioned in my life. And so I just began to trust it. And that was affirmed. When I met my shaman, one of the first things he told me was, he said, you have to follow the connection. So when you feel connection, that connection is there. If you imagine, like, there are all of these points of life that we could experience, paths of life. And we typically follow an atypical people, A to B, B to C, C to D, and we just follow that path, right? And it creates a narrow life experience. But if you are open and you allow yourself to follow what is a connection or what comes as a very specific message that is unique for you, and you start to follow it, may seem more windy, but I can guarantee you it is going to create a deeper, richer experience for your soul that gives you a more grounded sense of knowing who you are, a more grounded sense of being in a dance with life where you can trust the mystery more. And I have to say, it's just more liberating.
Totally. It's a lot harder to do for type A personalities, right? To really be more open to listening to intuition. But what you said is so true. It's definitely something I'm working on.
But I was a type A personality, so I was able to do it.
Mm.
And I'm absolutely type A personality. I was straight A student all through school. I remember in 7th grade, I cried when I got my first be, and my mother even laughed at me because she's like, how can you be like this? Because it's so different. It's so unique for my family, but you can do it. I just want to say you can. I was a type A personality. I think that I've like loosened up from being on this path, but it's possible.
So if you were in
You just have to lean in.
yes, if you were in a room today with your 23-year-old self, are you obviously everyone's fundamentally different, but do you think you're like, how different are you today, if that makes sense? Like compared to if you just kept that type A personality, you were doing really well as a graphic designer, and you just said, no, I'm going to keep doing this career, and you were still doing it now, 20 something years later. How different do you think you are today, and how much happier do you think you are today, having, like you said, taken this real unique circular path through life as opposed to one much more typical?
I mean, I'm like completely different from who I was when I was 23. And the essence of me is still the same. And so I feel like through taking this journey, I've connected to my essence. And my essence is that I've always been someone who cared about other people, which is why I went to Africa and did work in Africa. I've always been someone who had a thirst for life and has been curious about life. I've always been a seeker. So the essence of me has not changed. And it's interesting because even when I go back and read my journals from when I was 20 and 21 and 22, I talked a lot about the heart. And now here I am, I'm working with the heart. I help to open up people's hearts, but it's so different. And I remember when I was working in graphic design, and the next step for me, the only next viable step for me on the ladder of success in design was to open up my own studio. And I was working with the creative directors, the CEOs of all of these top design studios in LA. And I just saw how burnt out they were. I saw that they weren't seeing their families very often. And I just said that I can't live that life. That's not the life that I can live. And thank goodness that I had certain life experiences that turned me away from that trajectory, because it enabled me to be way more connected with my son, way more connected with my real path in life. And yeah, it's like night and day, complete, like night and day indifference of like if I had followed that path and the path that I lead today. And in terms of happiness, I'm so much happier. When I was 23, I used to doubt, question, overthink everything. I had a lot of insecurities, and I couldn't relax. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. And I do think that that could have happened through maturity, just from leading that other path. But for certain, the choices that I made to follow this circular, but more of my soul path, has given me liberation in all forms, in the body, mind, spirit, emotions, just fun. People can't, I mean, I'm going to be 52, and people can't believe the level of fun that I live from choosing this path. So I'm grateful.
Well, even just the fact that you're on a little island in the Pacific is very inspiring, because I think it's just, I find anyone that takes an unusual path in life to be inspiring for me, because I'm hoping to as well. I've got to live in different countries, and my wife's from the Philippines originally, and we talk about at some point we want to spend a year or two, we want to buy a hotel there, like a resort, and kind of like a rundown resort, and kind of rehab it. And she's got a bunch of family there that, and hopefully get them involved and do something there. And then give my son a couple of years living in the Philippines. And then maybe we go to Italy for a year and buy one of those villas you can get for nothing, but you have to redo them, and invest in the little town in Italy. And I want to have that kind of life where I'm not just, I've traveled a lot, and finally I've got roots in the Midwest and I love it here, but I want to live that kind of unusual life. And I think as you get older, it's so difficult to make those big changes, but you're proof that you can do it. And I'm sure there was some resistance for you to, it wasn't easy, I should say, for you to end up in Bali and have the life you have there, but you made it happen.
Yeah. And I love your vision. I love that you're thinking outside the box and taking your skill set and your path in real estate and learning how to thinking about how you can expand it in a way that is way more fulfilling, but still also provides something to the community. That sounds exciting. I would love to come visit you in the Philippines. But what's so interesting about living in Bali, for sure, I had a lot of resistance. Bali is it's a challenging society that there's not the same level of infrastructure that we have in the States. I was extremely frustrated by that. And for the longest time, I didn't know if I could make it work. But the more I just leaned into the culture and being in a culture that is very steeped in prayer and reverence, where people, the Balinese culture, the people here are making offerings every day to the earth, to the ocean, to humanity, to the children, to education. There's an energetic frequency of safety, of trust, of relaxation that I love. And the more I leaned into that, the less those things that were frustrating me, they kind of disappeared, and I learned how to live in harmony and acceptance in a different way. But it was definitely challenging to make that shift. But I think that when your level of frustration grows with your current situation, that frustration can propel you to just have the courage to make a change. And I actually have a lot of friends, clients who are part of my community who were thinking the same way as you, like, oh, we just want to give our kids a different experience. And they decide to go move off to New Zealand or they move to Italy. And so I highly encourage you make those leaps. It can be hard, but I have to say it's so rewarding. I studied cultural anthropology, so I'm interested in other cultures. And what's so interesting about that is when I was a student at Cornell, my professor did work in Indonesia. And I remember saying to myself, at some point, I'm going to bring my family to Indonesia. And then sure enough, like I moved here with my son, and he was with me for 2.5 years here in this beautiful country. So
Awesome.
just say yes. Just I know it's hard, but you just got to say yes.
Well, thank you for that. And like I said, you are, as an example, I always find that so inspiring. Do you see yourself staying there for a long time, or do you not even think in the future because you don't know how you'll feel in a few years, and you don't really think about that? Because that's one thing that I've always been incredibly goal orientated, and I realized that I'm trying to stop doing that because in some way it's not good to limit your future self, because if I say, yeah, I really want to stay here the next 10 years, I'm basically being closed off to how I'm going to feel in a year or two, and then you get stuck in, no, I'm going to do this for the next 10 years. So do you even think like that about how long you'll stay there, or are you just kind of open to seeing how you'll feel in the future?
I mean, 100%. I think that it's really just what you shared of not limiting your future self. I think goals are important. But when you say, I'm going to stay here for 10 years, it's like speaking a command, and you are now like creating that reality. So for me, what I've come to realize is Bali is a place of healing. It's a place where I come and I get deeply restored. And every time I've left and come back, I've had mm, this uncertainty, like, is it my home? Is it not my home? I feel like I would like to create it as a forever home for a place of respite, because I have a lot of big work to do out in the world. It is its own bubble. And so there's a way in which the culture, the community here is so powerful and beautiful, but it's disconnected from the rest of the world. And every time I go back to the States or to Europe or other parts of the West, I can feel that. And so I know that my work needs to be more on the other side of the planet. But it's such a place of rest and home and restoration and fun and play. And so there's a part of me that I want to create a home base here for life, for sure. But I can't say that I'm going to live in Bali full time. It's too far to get to the rest of the world. And I have too much work to do on the other side of the globe.
I'm so grateful we were connected. Shout out to our mutual friend Jen Diaz for connecting us, and thank you so much for sending me your book and just sharing your wisdom. And I really appreciate what you said. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to meditate more, number one, and I'm going to meditate on some of the things that you said today because you've got me thinking a lot. But you're such a beautiful soul, and I highly recommend your book. I put links to the show notes to Shaman's Apprentice, but it's so well written. You have a really good, you have a real gift with words. Like you have some real short little chapters, and then you have a very succinct sentence, and it's very powerful. So you have a beautiful command of the English language as well. So I just wanted to say I'm really enjoying it, and thank you so much, and thank you for the time. I'll give you the last word, but I really appreciate all the wisdom you shared today.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to meet you and to learn about you. And I'm taking away a lot as well from this experience. So thank you. And I mean, I love your excitement around reading the book. So I honestly can't wait to hear how you feel about once you've gotten to the end. So please, like, let's touch base and yeah, and keep sharing.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much.